What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are going over must-own or avoid late-round wide receivers. This is a stage in the draft where typically we're drafting players with a very low floor and we're shooting for maximum upside. Before we do get into the video though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was which quarterback threw the most touchdowns on third down. The correct answer was Derek Carr. Pretty good quarterback on third down last season. Now, Dawson Padgett, you got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which running back with at least 100 carries led the league in fantasy points per attempt? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. Right now, we are also answering your questions through the contact us section of our website. If you want your question potentially answered in an exclusive podcast available audio only, submit those questions you have at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. The link is in the description box below. And if you want to access those audio exclusive Q&As, follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Let's talk about some risky wide receivers, and the first one's not going super late, but I did want to make sure to touch on him because he can still be classified as risky, and he's going at around that 7th round area. He has been climbing. That's Marquise Brown of the Baltimore Ravens. So if he continues to climb, I definitely can see us classifying him more as a middle round pick than the late round pick we've become accustomed to. And the reason he has been climbing on draft boards is because he's a phenomenal pick where he has been going. Even somebody taking the robust RB draft strategy can still get Marquise Brown as a bench player, and one that we know is going to be more involved in his offense this year and already put up top 36 numbers in 2019. While he did finish as the wide receiver 46 in total fantasy points for last year, he did only appear in 14 games, and of receivers playing in 14 or more games, he was just outside the top 30 in fantasy points per game. Some of the major risk factors that come with drafting him are that he's on a very low passing volume offense. In 2019, they ranked dead last in the percentage of passing plays, coming in at 45.93% of their overall plays actually being passing plays. And that number isn't skewed because they may have ran a heavy amount of plays while leaning on the rushing quarterback. No, they also ranked dead last in the total passing plays, coming in at 440 pass attempts for the entire year for the Baltimore Ravens offense. So due to the style of offense, we do have to expect some volume concerns to go along with drafting Marquise Brown. There are also efficiency concerns coming from Lamar Jackson's historic 2019 season. First off, there is a year of film on him. Even the best quarterbacks who break out see reductions in many major categories just due to defenses knowing what to expect from them this season. It's not going to be anything new or something that they haven't seen. At least we can't project that. And Lamar Jackson's coming off a season in which he threw a passing touchdown on 1 in every 8.7 attempts. His single season passer rating for 2019 also ranks 11th all time, and his passing TD to INT ratio was also good for 14th all time. Clearly a historic season, but regression is likely incoming. Now, we do believe Marquise Brown can overcome some of these obstacles he's going to be faced with, and it's for a couple of major reasons. While the efficiency heading into 2020 is going to be somewhat of a concern when it comes to the overall ceiling that Marquise Brown may have, it's still going to be one of the better scoring offenses in the league. And simply put, Marquise Brown has a nose for big plays. He has a nose for the end zone. 7 touchdowns his first season in Oklahoma, 10 touchdowns the season after that. And as a rookie, he was able to score 7 times, even posting one of the best fantasy weeks we had seen throughout the entire season as early as week 1. Do we need to mention that he was hobbled and missing training camp due to a foot injury? So it's very likely we did not see a healthy Marquise Brown for that portion of the season, or even potentially the entire season. Considering his skill set heavily relies on his athletic ability, a foot injury is something that can be very debilitating. Since then, he has had follow-up surgery to remove a screw from his foot, which means all signs are a go for Marquise Brown in 2020. The efficiency concerns should also be made up from the fact that he only played in 58% of the total snaps for 2019, a mark that 60 plus other receivers were able to exceed that season. Any additional snaps will lead to increased volume because, believe it or or not, Marquise Brown still led the wide receiver position out of Baltimore in targets, despite playing in sub 60% of snaps. So that just goes to show you how involved he is in the offense while he's on the field. So for us, any risk concerns we have with Marquise Brown do not detract us from drafting him where he's currently going. The next player I wanted to talk about, we haven't really mentioned too much so far this offseason, and he's a player who has been very relevant in years past. That's Brandin Cooks, currently of the Houston Texans. This is now his 4th NFL team. Had some of the best luck when it comes to the fantasy quarterbacks throwing him the ball. He's had Tom Brady, Jared Goff, Drew Brees, and now Deshaun Watson. But overall, I think Brandin Cooks epitomizes the risky late round wide receiver to a T. Currently, he's going as a wide receiver 5, so clearly a bench player. And I mean, it's undeniable he does have upside. He has posted 1,000-yard seasons with each team he's been on. He's performed very well in year 1 on new teams, something that's been debilitating for fantasy production for free agent wide receivers. But he's coming off of a very, very down year. He also now has 5 concussions. If you ask me, I don't think he should realistically be playing, or at least should make it a point to limit him in some capacity. The guy's still young. He's 26 years old right now. He will be 27 to start the season, or at least he will be in late September. So theoretically, on a dynasty team, he should still be in that age range to have plenty of years left, plenty of gas in the tank, but that's really not the case. While he hasn't had a ton of soft tissue or season-ending injuries, those concussions are definitely being taken seriously. One concussion could take him out for this entire season, and that has to be a major concern for anybody who's drafting him. Now, I know another concern for this team is going to be how well they can perform offensively without DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think that's a major concern by everyone in the community, at least not anybody who is informed. Deshaun Watson, he is a very, very good quarterback. There are compilations on compilations of plays he's made outside of DeAndre Hopkins. And no, DeAndre Hopkins, while he does demand extra attention defensively, isn't a field stretcher like Brandin Cooks, who massively opens up opportunities for subpar receivers. Deshaun Watson, he makes a lot of plays on his own. Brandin Cooks is undeniably one of the most talented receivers he's had at his disposal, and it goes without saying that Deshaun Watson, if he pumps targets to a certain receiver, that receiver can post some of the best weeks in all of fantasy football. Last season, Will Fuller actually had the highest single week fantasy performance of 2019. It's a similar type of upside of what we could expect from Brandin Cooks so long as he's healthy. So overall, if Brandin Cooks remains healthy, I do see him easily outperforming the wide receiver 36, but not by a massive margin. It's not a player who I really want to take a hard stance on just because of the production in years past. No, the last time we did see him on the field, he did look like he lost a step. If that were not the case, he would probably be ranked as a high-end wide receiver 2 or somewhere in that range. But no, for that, he's a back-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 for me, and one that, while he may be outproducing his draft spot, could fall off a cliff at any minute or not even be on the field for an unknown amount of time, just being in concussion protocol. Considering the fact that you can have him as a bench stash player, one that you could probably put in your lineup early on in the season, where he's going, there is some value there, but he's not a player who I'm going out of my way to target. But if he falls to me, depending on my roster composition, I'm not afraid to pull the trigger. Real quick, before we do get into the next player, quickly shout out our draft package. If you want to know all the players in every round that we are targeting or avoiding, it's as easy as gaining access to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Not only will you get player breakdowns on all draftable players, but it is loaded with information to help you win your league, so consider checking that out today. Once again, link in description. But let's get over to the next player. The next player we have is Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. This is a player who has already been tanking in drafts due to the news of a broken foot and surgery. Right now, it is unclear if he will start the season on the PUP or if his recovery time is going to come at a soon enough pace to have him on the field as early as week 1. We haven't talked a ton about him, so I did want to bring it up because I do see people still drafting him in the later rounds. It somewhat makes sense. You have a player who is being taken in the middle rounds who now sustained an injury that could potentially be recovered from, resulting in no loss of time spent on field. The only difference is you would be getting a discount of several rounds when it comes to draft value. So when you're taking all three of those things into account, I can see how people might want to draft Deebo Samuel in the later rounds. Before we come to that conclusion though, I think it's important to talk a little bit about his injury he sustained. This injury is known as a Jones fracture. A lot of receivers have sustained this injury. Think Des Bryant, Julian Edelman in years past, who were top contributors at the wide receiver position, who had a hard time recovering from this injury. This is a surgery that often cases does require a second follow-up surgery. Sometimes that follow-up surgery can land after the season has completed, and sometimes the player just simply doesn't recover whatsoever, and as soon as they're on the field, they are just not the same player whatsoever. The reason I bring that up though is because the recovery rate and the length of time that the player does take off historically has had a heavy impact in the rate at which a second surgery is required. There were 35 players who have dealt with this injury that took 10 or more weeks to recover. Of those 35 players, just 4 of them required a second surgery. When looking at those numbers of sub 10 weeks of recovery before they return to practice, those numbers are alarmingly different. 60% of the players who did return to practice 10 weeks or earlier did require a second surgery. Compare that to 11.4% to the players who took 10 or more weeks off. Well, if you take a look at the calendar, we're right about 10 weeks until week 1. Deebo Samuel in a tweet said he only needs 10 weeks to recover, but historically an early recovery is not going to help him. If anything, it's going to increase the chance of him not returning healthy, posting minimal production compared to what we would typically expect from him, or simply returning for a short period of time only to be held out due to injury shortly thereafter. This is also a team that loves to spread the ball around when it comes to the passing game and would have no problem using Deebo Samuel in a limited capacity if they knew that would help him remain healthy and be a better tool for them to use in the playoffs. The only other outcome is he starts the season on the pup, and I'm not really drafting a player just to sit on my bench for 6 weeks. I know that there's going to be a player on the waiver wire that I'm likely going to be much more interested in looking at that upside rather than seeing Deebo Samuel's name appear on my injury list week after week unless there is an IR spot on my roster. So for me, you could take a shot on him late if he doesn't start the season on the pup. I could see him potentially returning value there, but it does bring a question as to how long you're going to have him on your. But history has shown us that there is a risk of re-injury that occurs if. But history has shown us there has been a risk of But history has shown us an increased risk of re-injury if he does come back within that timetable. So his floor is pretty low. The upside is moderate. So he would probably have to be my wide receiver 5 for me to even consider it, and that's barring him starting on the pup. The final player we have is somebody who I love targeting late, and that's Anthony Miller of the Chicago Bears. If you followed us for a while, you do know that we have Allen Robinson much higher than experts consensus, much higher than ADP, and understandably that does go a bit against the grain. This is overall an offense that has ranked very poorly as early as 1 season ago. The only thing is, if you look back 2 years, this is a team that was in the playoffs pretty deep, a disappointing loss there, a coach that had won Coach of the Year, one of the better scoring offenses in the league, and arguably some of the best pieces around them to help them repeat the success that they had in 2018. The best part about it though is for fantasy, they don't need to improve dramatically. In fact, Allen Robinson was very much successful at the wide receiver position for Chicago. Despite them being a poor scoring offense, he was top 12 in many major categories, but this is about Anthony Miller. Anthony Miller himself, he did have a stretch of games towards the tail end of the season in which he was a top producer at the position as well. Throughout a 5-game stretch from weeks 11 through 15 last season, smack dab in the middle of the fantasy playoffs, he had 52 targets, translated that into 377 yards to go along with 2 touchdowns. A 5-game sample is no small amount, and he played consistently through each game. We cannot forget that Anthony Miller is a very talented player. He had a 2nd-round draft capital just a few seasons ago. He has an 86th percentile burst score, 85th percentile agility score, a 75th percentile catch radius, and we do have to cut the young receiver a bit of slack for his production a season ago. He did have shoulder surgery recovering this offseason, season. He also only started in 7 games, and the dude only saw 62% of snaps. All numbers we should see going up for this upcoming season, yet his ADP as a pro is at an all-time low. So for me, he's definitely somebody who I'm looking to get a piece of if I haven't drafted Allen Robinson in the earlier portions of the draft. Typically, I'm not having Allen Robinson on my team because I'm usually drafting running backs at that stage of the draft, so Anthony Miller is definitely a welcome addition. But guys, let us know who your target or avoid wide receivers are that are risky in the later rounds. And if you did enjoy this video, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.